The WWE Hall of Fame, considered by many to be the culmination of a career well spent in professional wrestling. However, for me, it's really never been all that, especially when you consider that they're missing a lot of things that a Hall of Fame should have, such as a physical building, a clear criteria over what makes a Hall of Famer, and they're missing a lot of people who should be in the Hall of Fame, but aren't. Like who, you ask? Well, they're the topic of this episode, because today... Thank you to all my amazing supporters over on Patreon like Meiji Strait and the Tribal Bull David McConnell. To find out how to get your own Patreon shoutout, go over to my Patreon page. Okay, so before we start this list, I want to say that there are a lot of people out there who feel like WWE is running out of people to put into the Hall of Fame. However, that is not the case, as there's even a website dedicated to people who aren't in WWE's Hall of Fame. And while this list does contain 25 people, there are a lot more than that, so just think of this as a sampling. And also, this is just my personal opinion of who I feel most deserves to be in but isn't. Alright, but with all this being said, we got 25 entries, so let's just go ahead and get into the list. Okay, look, I understand that he's a total jobber, but he is the jobber as far as I'm concerned. And so, if there was going to be a legacy jobber, how could you do any better than the Brooklyn Brawler, especially for WWE? And that's not even including Steve Lombardi's other work for the company, even if some of it is better left unspoken about. Like Knuckleball Schwartz. But hey, I said we're not going to speak about that now, are we? Even to this day, Bruce Prichard remains as one of the more prominent figures for WWE behind the scenes, and fan-wise, many of us remember him as Brother Love. And for either contribution, you can make the argument that he does belong in the Hall of Fame. But when you combine both of them, plus add on to the fact that he's still in good graces with the company, it becomes even stranger that he hasn't been inducted yet. I don't know what the holdup is, but I would really like to find out, especially because I'm sure that he would just love to be inducted. While the natural Butch Reed didn't win a lot in the WWF, and he even has the dubious honor of being the first person ever eliminated on an official Royal Rumble, he was still featured rather well during his time ever since he signed with his manager Slick, who by the way is a bonus entry for this list. And he even got to make a cameo back in 2007 on an episode of SmackDown. While I'm not the biggest proponent of celebrities being inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, if there was one who deserved it, it would be Cyndi Lauper, as she's a major star of the 1980s music scene, as well as being a major contributor to how WWE got into the mainstream spotlight. And with a lot of the other celebrities that WWE has already put in, how is Cyndi Lauper not one of them? Okay, so while it is quasi-understandable why Christian hasn't been inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame within recent years, since he is a member of All Elite Wrestling, we should also keep in mind that so was Billy Gunn when he was inducted as a part of DX. And even beyond that, before he joined All Elite, Christian could have been inducted many years before, especially since his buddy Edge is already in. Before the Usos and before the New Day, there was Demolition. Now granted, they might just be a cheap Road Warriors ripoff, and they're not exactly the biggest fans of WWE right now, they're still a significant tag team within the company's legacy. And if Scott Steiner could get over his beef and get inducted into the Hall of Fame, well, I think Demolition can too. Okay, while Earl Hebner might have been released from WWE for less than optimal reasons, and of course he was also involved in the Montreal Screwjob, let's be real, WWE has inducted people who have done way worse. And not to mention that he was inducted in the Impact Wrestling Hall of Fame, which is where he's currently working after his very brief and forgettable stint in All Elite Wrestling. But just focusing on his work in WWE, let's be real, he was involved in some of the most crucial storylines in the company's history. Oh, and that reminds me, we should also induct his brother Dave too. Okay, so here's another controversial one, but nevertheless, I still think he is quite accomplished enough in the world of professional wrestling that despite his personal problems, I do see him as a potential candidate to be inducted. And sure, his WWF career may not be the most prominent, but he is a former WWF Tag Team Champion, and the British Bulldogs were really popular. Oh, but this also kind of reminds me, for anybody who was wondering if I'm going to mention Chris Benoit, the answer is no. With tax season coming around, we should remember that Mike Rotunda, IRS, is not in the WWE Hall of Fame. As one half of Money Inc. and a former tag team champion, and one of the original users of Hulk Hogan's I Am a Real American theme song, how is it possible that he's still not in, especially when he still does cameos for WWE from time to time? While most of his major successes happened outside of WWE, from managing the Midnight Express to his amazing podcast, even if we go by just his WWE work alone, I say he does have a place in the Hall of Fame. But furthermore to that, and going back to his outside endeavors, let's remember that Cornette does have a pretty strong following right now, which is something WWE could capitalize on. And while he was there to induct the Rock and Roll Express, they might be able to gain even more if he was inducted himself. And while I know Cornette has been very vocal about not caring about the Hall of Fame, which might be a reason why he's not in it, I still think a proper offer could be made. The Ugandan giant Kamala may not have been the most accomplished World Wrestling Federation superstar, but he also qualifies as a certain caliber of big man that I say WWE just doesn't have anymore. And for many wrestling fans out there, as a kid, he was one of the most memorable wrestlers out there of his era. While he may not have won a gold medal with a broken freaking neck, let's remember that Ken Patera was the Olympic level athlete before Kurt Angle in the WWF. And he was really popular during his time. He's even a former Intercontinental Champion. Now again, he does have a bit of controversy involving a window at a McDonald's, and he was also part of a class action lawsuit against WWE. He's still Hall of Fame worthy and should have been inducted long before the 2020 lawsuit. Here we have yet another person who somehow wasn't inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, even though they did get the main event WrestleMania 2 alongside Hulk Hogan to be exact. Now, King Kong Bundy was one of the best big men out there of his time, and was one of the very few wrestlers who could pull off being a credible threat to Hulkamania during the rock and roll wrestling era. And so, how has he not been put in? Well, that's just weird. Here's someone else who is probably better known for his work outside of the WWF than for his work in it, but even based off of that alone, he still had a Hall of Fame worthy career, as he got to body slam Yokozuna on the deck of the Intrepid, and he got to contend against him for the WWF World title at both SummerSlam and WrestleMania 10. I've said it time and time again, Marty Jannetty is easily the more talented out of the two Rockers, with him being a much better in-ring technical wrestler. However, he's just not good at kissing up, at least not as good as Shawn Michaels. And if WWE is willing to induct him, then they might as well go ahead and put his superior tag team partner in as well. For an entire generation, Miss Elizabeth was the valet. She was the woman of the WWF. And even though she wasn't a wrestler proper, she was still a very important part of some of WWF's most important storylines, especially when it came to the Mega Powers exploding. Also, not to mention her reuniting with the Macho Man at WrestleMania 7, and her involvement with him for his feud against Ric Flair culminating at WrestleMania 8. Okay, while George Gray may not have always had the best possible gimmicks, the former one-man gang was a major player of the World Wrestling Federation back during the 80s, as back then WWF had a great roster of really strong characters, big men with lots of personality, and the one-man gang is just another great example of this. Okay, so this is probably the most understandable one out of everyone on this list, as it has been reported that Owen Hart's wife doesn't want his legacy associated with WWE in any way, although she was perfectly happy to allow AEW to honor him instead. I perpetually find myself wondering, who did Rick Martel get on the bad side of, since I think he is one of the very best wrestlers that there ever was, and yet he hardly ever gets talked about for some reason. And with that, it should be no surprise that he hasn't been put in the WWE Hall of Fame, even though he was a part of Strikeforce, even though he was part of the Can-Am connection, and he had that stint as the model Rick Martel. Well, it doesn't appear that she's a major fan of WWE anymore, since she is married to Brock Lesnar and could come back, I'm sure, anytime she wants. Sable has been surprisingly absent from the company, and so while she's not in the Hall of Fame, and I do think she should be in, it might just be a case that she's not there because she doesn't want to, as WWE wants their Hall of Fame to be an honor, something that the participants want to be a part of. And while I may not be a fan of her work, I still have to say, in terms of placement, it's really hard to deny the impact that Sable had on the company. Call him Psycho, call him Vicious, call him Justice. Hey, you can even call him Captain Scissors for all it matters. The point of the matter is that Sid has a pretty established career in WWE, having gone to main event WrestleMania not once, but twice. And he's also one of the select few individuals who got to win both the WWF and WCW world titles. Now that's saying something. Okay, on this one, WWE is clearly waiting for something. What that something is, I have no idea. And while potentially, and this is pure speculation, they might be trying to work The Rock's induction into a program with Roman Reigns, the question remains, what are they waiting for on that as well? And yes, it has been stated that The Rock allegedly is not in wrestling shape for this year's WrestleMania, but remember, this Hollywood WrestleMania was delayed an entire year, so how much more advance notice does he need? If there's a reason why they're waiting to induct The Rock, I can't imagine what it is at this point, and I feel they just kinda need to go ahead and do it anyway. Alright, so here we have an interesting one where Batista was originally announced to be inducted in the 2020 Hall of Fame for WWE, but because of the obvious circumstances, his induction was pulled back. And now, 3 years later, and we're still waiting, which is even stranger with WrestleMania taking place in Hollywood this year. And so, between all of WWE's major Hollywood players such as The Rock, John Cena, and Batista, it's kind of strange to think that none of them are getting in this year. And now we have someone else who still hasn't been put in the Hall of Fame, even though they've also main evented a WrestleMania. Although granted, by this logic, Lawrence Taylor should be in too. Anyway, at one point in time, Bam Bigelow was considered to be the next top babyface. That is, until he got double knee surgery, which apparently didn't fit into Vince McMahon's plans for him. And therefore his major push as a babyface disappeared. But even despite that, he still had a great career in the WWF, and I want to see him inducted soon. Alright, just so you know, this list wasn't in ranked order of importance or anything, but even so, I do feel that this entry is the biggest one. And here we are with the person who I feel most deserves to be put into the WWE Hall of Fame, President Jack Tunney. Sure, his exit from the company was not really all that great, but without him and Maple Leaf Wrestling, WWE wouldn't be the company that it is today. I covered this in a previous episode, by the way, so just check that out if you want to learn more. But regardless as to any personal problems he may or may not have with WWE, the reality is they do not pay any attention to him whatsoever, and they refuse to acknowledge his legacy, which is a crying shame, because as far as I'm concerned, he's the very best on-screen authority figure the WWE ever had. Well, there you go, 25 individuals who I feel should be in the WWE Hall of Fame, but aren't. Who are some others you could name? Let me know down in the comments, and please be sure to be subscribed to this channel, and make sure that you leave a like as well. Thank you for watching, and thank you to all my awesome Patreon supporters out there, and as always, Dave knows.